Kia ora, I'm Ruth and welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast and part 5 of this special 6-part financial independence series. On my blog, thehappysaver.com, I created a comprehensive financial independence series of 6 blog posts where I mapped out a plan to help you on your way to becoming financially independent. Now, because I know that there are some in my audience who only read my blog and others who only listen to this podcast, I wanted to make sure that both parts of my audience got the same information. So what I've done is I have turned each blog post into a podcast episode. Fear not, it is a temporary change to the regular episodes where I chat with a diverse bunch of people and I learn their story and condense it down so that you can hear helpful, relatable stories from Kiwis who are sharing their experiences, their tips and point of view on personal finance in New Zealand. Today's episode is about how to get out of debt and why should you bother. But before I get into it, I just have a quick word from today's sponsor. Okay, you've got me, I'll admit it, I'm the money nerd in our household. I genuinely enjoy keeping a very close eye on Pocketsmith as it tracks our retirement funds, our investments, the value of our home, and of course the daily flow of money into our mini bank accounts. The details fascinate me, numbers fascinate me. But my husband Jonny, not so much. He just wants to know we're doing okay, but he is just not interested in all those details. We both think of money differently. Pocketsmith is aware of this as it lets me create a custom dashboard that shows Jonny the same information I see, but differently, in far less detail, meaning he still gets to play an active role in our joint financial planning using information that makes sense to him. If you have a spouse trying to opt out of talking about your money, I think Pocketsmith might be the secret weapon to bring you together and foster healthy conversations around money in your home. If you want to supercharge your finances with Pocketsmith, have we got a deal for you. Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. That's pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. I think of debt as a phase of life that I moved through. Get out of debt, stay out of debt is something I often say. That period of my life has passed and I've moved on. Jonny and I have now been entirely debt-free since our early 30s, and I encourage you to head down the debt-free path as well. Now, for me, debt has always had an ick factor, a feeling I'm actually quite grateful for. I like earning interest, but I freaking well hate paying it. When I was in my early 20s, each time I went into debt, it was under the advice of others. A good friend encouraged me to lay by, which was the 90s equivalent of buy now, pay later, a piece of art. My dad encouraged me to take out student loans. Both meant well. They thought that using OPM or other people's money was an obvious solution. But the ick factor for both of those decisions was really high for me. In fact, a day after I made my first payment on the piece of art, I returned and paid it off in full. And 2 years into university, I hated seeing my rising student loan balance due to the interest that we were charged at the time and my bank overdraft. So I paused my studies to work full-time, and I returned 2 years later, paid my student loan off in full, and I cash flowed the next 3 years of study, graduating with a BSc in psychology and a graduate diploma in management. And I was a better student for having done so. I'd removed the financial burden I felt, I'd grown up a lot, and I had gained invaluable workplace experience. When Jonny and I decided to buy a home together, we signed up for the most significant debt, a mortgage. I was 27, he would have been 28, and interestingly, the ick factor was reduced. Why was that? Well, unlike the debts I'd had in the past, I knew we couldn't afford to save up and pay cash for a house, and debt could help me buy a home. On the advice of our bank, settling into a 30-year mortgage was the normal thing to do. But just 1 year in, I felt uneasy again. And I compared the money we earned with the money we paid on our mortgage, and I just couldn't wrap my head around paying for my house until I was 57. What a ridiculous idea in my mind. So we got after it. We upped our mortgage payments, we threw lump sums at it, and we paid off our home in just 5 years. Knowing what I know now, we actually could have paid it off much faster. Despite our bank trying to lure us back into debt to buy a rental property, There has never been a day that I or we regretted becoming permanently debt-free. We never have to seek the bank's opinion about our financial decisions ever again. But just a note before I really get into it. I know some people are in debt due to factors beyond their control, and while I hope this podcast helps, it's not written specifically for them. Having answered thousands of questions over the years, I know a much greater cohort of people have made questionable decisions that have led them directly into debt. It's no one's fault but their own, and this podcast is for you. Now, you'll often hear good debt, bad debt, and for the record, I don't subscribe to the concept of good debt and bad debt. It's all just money that you owe someone else, and trying to justify your debt positively by calling it good debt is just pulling the wool over your own eyes. So don't do that. When you take on debt, you actively decide to give up a portion of all future paychecks to service it. This may be for a finite period, or it may become indefinite. For example, in my podcast episode number 91, Grace told me that she put her $500 haircut on a 10-week payment plan, foregoing $50 of her take-home pay each week to pay off her debt. A recent graduate I know is earning $130,000 a year, but she forgoes $250 a week to pay back her $90,000 student loan, and she will continue to make this payment for the next 7 years. Most people with mortgages go back into debt as they constantly borrow to upgrade their whare or upsize. Borrowing money has long-term consequences for growing your wealth, and it is increasingly common that we don't have just one payment sucking the life out of our take-home pay, we have multiple. It's not hard to find a university graduate with all 3 debts mentioned above: a buy now, pay later, a student loan, and now a mortgage. And in each phase of life, those who think that debt is perfectly normal start to collect a few of them. Inevitably, one day, life happens and the chickens come home to roost. Something upsets this delicate balance of their income offsetting the debt that they have to service. That is when most people begin to feel the burden of debt, which invites risk into their lives. So my plan for you is to avoid going into debt in the first place. Ignore the common refrain that you have to go into debt, because it's just not true. Now, I've discussed this in part 2 of this podcast series, that was budgeting. Sinking funds are your ticket to staying out of debt in the first place. The same rules apply whether you are my daughter who's 16 and just starting out, or a 55-year-old listening to this. Save for the item you know you will buy and pay cash. No excuses. If you have enough lead-in time, most debt, with a mortgage being a possible exception, can be avoided. Jonny asked me if I could have avoided taking out student loans. The answer was actually no, because I never even realised an alternative existed. I was told that I had to take on debt to study, and as a parent, well, I'm not going to let my precious daughter wander unquestioningly into debt as I once did. Learn to budget, don't learn to handle debt. And if you're a parent or a caregiver, don't teach your children to handle debt. It's just not good for them. I know plenty of parents who agree to lend money to their teen to buy a car. It feels very organised as they set up a weekly repayment plan, and the teen heads off to their part-time job each week to generate the coin to pay the parents back. But inevitably, before long, the car fails its WAF and needs repairs. Unfortunately, their parents' wise teachings, they didn't extend to guiding them to have money set aside for these expenses. So, payments to mum and dad pause while the teen pays the mechanic. A common scenario nowadays is that the repairs are paid for using buy now, pay later. So, great job, mum and dad. Your child now has 2 debts. Handle that. Instead of teaching your children that debt is an inevitable part of life, teach them to budget. Teach them that building wealth is an inevitable part of life. The world has changed in the last 10 years. The ease with which you can wander into debt is astounding. If you don't coach your children to avoid debt, they will fall right into it. Car loans are rapidly replacing parent loans. Buy now, pay later, and credit cards will pay for most other things. Debt is a really slippery slope. But what if it's too late? What if you're listening to this and you're already in debt? That's no problem, because getting out of debt can start right now. And the very first step is to stop borrowing more money. Yep, it's pretty much that easy. But I'm often surprised when someone says that they are struggling with debt and they want to get out of it, and my big idea to stop taking out any more of it is met with silence and then a but we have a trip planned and I was going to put it on my credit card, but I promised my parents I would fly to visit them and I was going to put it on buy now, pay later. But I got an interest-free credit card, so that's not really debt. But no more. It is all just money that you owe someone else. The definition, you know this one, of insanity is continuing to do the same thing yet expecting different results. If you are sick of debt, immediately stop taking on more. What about if you are in debt but feeling pretty comfy? Well, to be honest, if you are comfortable and in debt, I don't think this particular podcast will help you. You don't believe you have a problem and there is no sense of urgency to become debt-free. You'll likely see my ideas as naive. You have to feel that anxiety in your stomach when an invoice arrives and you are unsure how you'll pay for it. You need to feel just a little bit sick when your credit card statement arrives and you spent more than you realised. Or when your beloved pet needs the vet and for the first time you sign up for a buy now, pay later and know you are doing it because you don't have the cash to pay. Or if your company announces a restructuring and your income is suddenly on the line and you know there are no reserves to pay your future bills. You need to feel that foreboding when the news headlines say mortgage rates are about to rise again. If you are comfortably in debt, you'll buy that new car instead of paying off your mortgage. You'll receive an inheritance and go on a trip instead of wiping your debts clean and buying your freedom. You'll borrow against your house to remodel your kitchen. And on it goes. Until you feel a little bit ick, well, pretty much everything stays the same. But ask yourself, where's the personal growth? Where is the big picture thinking for your life? Is this really all you see for yourself? Constantly handing over a portion of every paycheck to pay for the things you bought last month, last year, last decade, or last century? What if your working life was spent planning your future instead of paying off everything you did in your past? When you focus on making the monthly payments, how can you focus on gaining financial freedom and growing your net worth? How will you ever reach a point where you can decide what you want to do without considering a lender's point of view? Your reliance on your paycheck to service your debt repayments adds an element of risk to your life that I don't think a lot of people are seeing right now. It majorly limits your opportunities. Now, when interest rates were historically low, air quotes there, I was delighted for those I knew who were firmly on a get-out-of-debt adventure. Low mortgage interest rates meant that more of their monthly payment went to paying off the principal of their mortgage. And boy, oh boy, did they make hay while the sun was shining. Conversely, others saw this as a huge opportunity to borrow more money because the debt was apparently cheap. Well, I recall thinking that the constant use of the words historically low could actually only mean one thing, that mortgage rates would likely increase, and so they have. And those who took it as an opportunity to smash debt are now winning, while those who saw it as the chance to leverage up had unwittingly invited an element into their lives that they are currently not enjoying, and that's risk. When you borrow money, you invite risk into your life, and your lender has a say over you. My husband, Jonny, he doesn't have much to say on my blog or on this podcast, but he often says that he wishes people could feel what it is like not to have debt. Freedom is a word that he frequently uses. Our income comes in, we pay our regular bills, rates, and electricity and what have you, and the rest is ours to do with what we like. And that's financial freedom, and it feels freaking great. I'd say to you that whatever your debt of choice is, just pay it off fast. Student loans, credit cards, car loans, family loans, buy now, pay later, your mortgage, etc., pay it off. It's all debt, money you borrowed, and every day of your life you will be handing over your income to pay it back and all of the interest you've been charged. What I encourage you to do is list your debt balances from the smallest to the biggest, irrespective of interest rates. And now you know what you are facing. For example, if you've got consumer debts, You might have a $200 buy now, pay later, a $300 family loan, $3,000 owing on a credit card, and a student loan balance of 20 grand. So a total debt of 23,500. Make minimum payments and stay current on all of your debts except the smallest debt, that $200 buy now, pay later. And with that smallest debt, pay it off as fast as you possibly can. Get upset about it. Sell stuff, potentially including the item that caused the debt in the first place. Work harder, slash your living costs, make more money, and pay it off quickly. Then move on to the next smallest debt. Believe it or not, I actually meet many people who enjoy this process. They feel invigorated by the fact that they have taken charge of their money and are taking action. Now, this method is called the debt snowball method of becoming debt-free, and I personally think it is the most effective. It's ironic to me that people fight back against the debt snowball method with the logic that you should pay your higher interest debt first. Now, these are the very same people who have spent years happily paying interest on their debt. If you approach the debt snowball with a fighting attitude, you'll be debt-free much faster than you think, irrespective of interest rates. If your smallest debt is $200, as I just mentioned, make additional payments as fast as possible until it's gone. Then move on to your next smallest debt, the $300 family loan that you're paying off, and take the payments that you were putting towards that first debt and now put all those payments on the second debt. Hit it hard, using all your income that you can spare until it's gone. Because you're budgeting now, you will know exactly how much income you have to spare to pay off debt. As quickly as possible, move through your list of debts, working from the smallest balance to the largest, paying each off in full before moving to the next one. Keep making progress until you are done, and then cut off your access to that type of lending. Send those marketing emails they send you to junk, unsubscribe to websites, cut up credit cards, and throw their mail in the trash. You will pay off these smaller ones fast, motivating you to keep going. Things will slow down once you hit the bigger ones, such as the student loans and the mortgages. This will take years in many cases, and it's a long grind to the finish line. Whereas these smaller debts can be aggressively paid off, creating a more sustainable and longer-term plan for your bigger debts is really essential. But the effort and the journey are worth it, and I'm in touch with many people who've spent years clearing debt. The emails I receive and conversations with people who've become debt-free for the first time are some of the most motivating I will ever hear. Now, I did it, they did it, and I see absolutely no reason why you can't too. But what about debt consolidation? I say no thanks to that. If you have several smaller debts with varying interest rates, it can be really tempting to consolidate or combine them into one new debt, and often people will roll these debts onto their mortgage. I'm not a fan, and why is that? Well, because you didn't pay off any debt. It might have felt like you did something. You've researched options, you've contacted lenders, and you've filled out paperwork. But in all honesty, you simply moved it somewhere else. So changing your spending behaviors and feeling the pain of taking your earned income and putting it towards your debt is one of the best ways to stop you from returning to debt. And just a thought on housing debt for you. I feel physically sick at the very thought of my daughter having to take on a mortgage of the size that many are signing up for these days. Goodness knows what the price of housing will be if and when she decides to buy one. And sitting on the sidelines and watching the increase in the size of mortgages as Kiwis sell the same houses to each other is one of the key reasons I put so much effort into teaching her how to save and invest outside of housing. Hopefully she can buy her own home one day. But if she can't or she doesn't want to, the income she can draw from her share investments will be able to cover her rent. As it stands today, Jonny and I can't afford to gift her money towards a house deposit. But since her birth, we've given her the gift of small investments into ETF funds that could become the start of her own house deposit or a rent payment. Ask yourself, did you buy too much house? Is having a home at all costs worth it? Is giving 30 plus years of your working life worth it? I'm staggered at some mortgages people sign up for these days to stay in a particular location. I'm in favour of moving cities to buy a more affordable home. That's what I did, moving from Wellington to Christchurch to buy our first home. But we didn't just buy a house, we found ourselves new and interesting careers, and we made plenty of new friends. However, the Christchurch earthquake saw our debt-free status severely under threat when our property was red zoned and our land was acquired by the government, meaning that we were forced to move. Now, due to supply and demand, Christchurch house prices rocketed and house quality sank like a rock. We would have had to spend more money to buy a worse house. So we moved to a different region with cheaper housing, which at that time was Central Otago. Now, I know your town, your city or region has things that make you want to stay. I'm saying there is no harm in looking elsewhere to get ahead. Whatever decision you make, it has its pros and its cons. When you take on a mortgage, you must have an end date in your calendar, and that should be your goal, because currently in some cities in New Zealand, mortgages have no end in sight. One of the best things about becoming debt-free is when you make your final payment towards your debt, whether it's a smaller consumer debt or bigger ones like a student loan, a business loan or a mortgage, you give yourself an immediate pay rise. For example, when the final payment is made on the student loan I mentioned earlier, that's a $250 weekly or a $13,000 annual pay rise that ex-student will be enjoying. Becoming debt-free lets you breathe. You suddenly have additional income coming in that can protect you from drama. You will find it far easier to cash flow the things you want to do, and you can quickly increase the amount of money you invest for retirement or financial independence. Even early retirement suddenly becomes a very genuine option. But what if I'm wrong about debt? I asked myself and Jonny many times in the early stages of our financial independence journey, what if I'm wrong? What if becoming debt-free was a wasted opportunity to leverage our money to build wealth? We could just take out more debt. We could buy a heavily leveraged rental property and find out. But you know what? We never did, and we never will. I think I'm right about getting out of debt. Our lives are better for having done so, and it has removed a thick layer of stress. Since becoming debt-free, we have massively reduced our risk exposure, and that has helped us navigate life's dramas. We used a credit card, or a debt card if you will, to avoid using our money to pay for the stuff we purchased, but that didn't lead us to grow wealth. Once I calculated the annual fees, the fact that you spend more when you use credit, and the hassle factor of budgeting when using credit cards, they actually left us worse off. We've never gone near car loans, despite salespeople's very good efforts. We've never gone near buy now, pay later, or any other high-interest forms of short-term lending, simply because we got really good at tracking our net worth and budgeting our income and expenses, having money set aside for emergencies, and paying into our retirement. We make enough to run our own lives and grow our wealth, and we don't need to borrow money to prop ourselves up. When a risky event does occur, such as losing our entire house in a natural disaster in 2011, our discussions were between us and our insurer. It was such a relief to know that as we tried to save our home, no lender knocked on our door keen to hear how their asset was faring. Rising mortgage interest rates have had no impact on us. When I wanted to stay home with my baby until she started school, I didn't have to consider that my student loan payments would stop because I no longer had a loan. Our debt-free life has given us the freedom to work the jobs we want when we want. We get to live in the house we want, in the region we want. We can travel and be generous. And the most significant gift is that we have a large degree of freedom over how we spend our time. Being debt-free has given us a level of immunity from the world around us. Debt was a phase of life, and it should also be that for you. Use it to your advantage, pay it off, and move on with your life. Get out of debt and stay out of debt. Now, next time I will share the final installment in my series of 6 podcasts, which is about learning about investing and earning interest instead of paying it. So that's it for today. If you have enjoyed today's episode and found it helpful, please share it with your friends and whānau. It's the best way that people can learn about what I do and the resources I share. And finally, get out there and kōrero more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.